that. Welcome back to the channel, folks. I hope you're ready for a splendid weekend. We got to turn the sound off that. There's an awful delay. There's always an awful delay. Welcome back to Professor Dark Academia. I am the professor. If you're a big fan of ancient history and old literature, you've come to the right place. Today will be unlike our usual scripted content. We're not going to give too many facts. We're not going to give any lectures. There's nothing exploratory. We're just going to get straight into the content. We're just going to dig up the source and read straight from Suetonius. We're reading the 12 Caesars today. How is the sound, by the way? Let me know. Because I can't hear it. Because I'm not wearing headphones. I don't want to wear headphones. As I said a moment ago, we are reading the 12 Caesars by Suetonius. We're going to focus on the chapter specifically regarding Julius Caesar, the first Caesar. And if we have some time left over, we might cover part of the chapter of, might need to be a tad louder. Thank you, Chef and Awesome. I will increase my volume just a notch. I try to do this ASMR, but I understand the sound doesn't carry very well. I don't want to move this too much. Folks watching on their phone. Hello, Kareem. Welcome to the channel. Like I said, we might cover a little of Augustus. It depends on how much battery we have. Nothing's plugged in. If I have the sound plugged in, then I can't have the power plugged in. Sometimes I have coffee. Sometimes I have tea with me. Today I will be drinking coffee. You can't see it. It's slightly out of frame, but I've got my Mr. Coffee drink right here and ready. No kettle today. We're getting just the hot bean juice. Okay, tuck yourselves in, everybody. Here we go. We're not reading any preface. We're not reading any introduction. We're not going to read any of the crap that publishers like to put at the beginning of the book. We're going straight to the meat. No appetizer. Maybe dessert. We dropped from 30 viewers to 9. I guess I'm just that ugly. It's the hairline. Okay, we're going to raise this up a notch. There we go. Here we are. This was written contemporary to the period. In fact, let's find out what age it is before we really get into it. AD 69. Nice. Okay. Here's the book. Julius Caesar, who was afterwards deified. Gaius Julius Caesar lost his father at the age of 15 between 85 and 84 BCE. During the next consulship, after being nominated to the priesthood of Jupiter, he broke an engagement, as you do, made for him while he was still a boy, to marry one Casutia, for though rich, she came of only equestrian family. Instead, he married Cornelia, daughter of that Cinna who had been named consul 4 times, and later she bore him a daughter named Julia. The dictator Sulla tried to make Caesar divorce Cornelia, and when he refused, stripped him of the priesthood, his wife's dowry, and his own inheritance, treating him as if he were a member of the opposite party. Yuck. Treated him like a Democrat. Ew. Caesar disappeared from public view, and though suffering from a virulent attack of quartan fever, in the comments, what is quartan fever? If anybody knows, Google it if you wish. He was forced to find a new hiding place almost every night and bribe householders to protect him from Sulla's secret police. Okay, so Caesar was on the run, couch surfing. Finally, he won Sulla's pardon through the intercession of the Vestal Virgins and his near relatives Mamericus Aemilius and Aurelius Cotta. It is well known that when his most devoted and eminent friends pleaded Caesar's cause and would not let the matter drop, Sulla at last gave way. Whether he was divinely inspired or showed peculiar foresight is an arguable point, but these were his words. Very well then, you win. Take him, but never forget that the man whom you want me to spare will one day prove the ruin of the party which you and I have so long defended. There are many Mariuses in this fellow Caesar. What that means, I'm not sure. There is a notation. We will not be following the notation. Mariuses must have been some vexed individual who disgraced the ruling political party. Caesar first saw military service in Asia, where he went as aide-de-camp to Marcus Thermus, who always carried a hot thermos with him, the provincial governor in 81 BCE. When Thermus sent Caesar to raise a fleet in Bithynia, he wasted so much time at King Nicomedes' court that a homosexual relationship between them was suspected. And suspicion gave place to scandal when, soon after his return to headquarters, he revisited Bithynia, ostensibly collecting a debt incurred there by one of his freedmen. Okay. Well, thank you for that comment, Steve. Just let me know how the sound is on the TV. Yeah, mine, I'm out of sync as well. I had to turn the sound off on this phone so I could record with that one. However, Caesar's reputation improved later in the campaign, when Thermus awarded him the civic crown of oak leaves at the storming of Mytilene for saving a fellow soldier's life. He also campaigned in Sicilia under Servilius Icarus. I wanted to say Icarus. It's not Icarus. It's Servilius. But not for long, because the news of Sulla's death sent him hurrying back to Rome, where a revolt headed by Marcus Lepidus seemed to offer prospects of rapid advancement, that being 78 BCE. Nevertheless, though Lepidus made him very advantageous offers, Caesar turned them down. He had small confidence in Lepidus's capacities and found the political atmosphere less promising than he had been led to believe. After this revolt was suppressed, Caesar brought a charge of extortion against Cornelius Dolabella, an ex-consul who had once been awarded a triumph, but failed to secure a sentence, so he decided to visit Rhodes until the resultant ill feeling had time to die down, meanwhile taking a course in rhetoric from Apollonius Molo, the best living exponent of the art of rhetoric. Winter had already set in when he sailed for Rhodes, and was captured by pirates off the island of Pharmacusa. They kept him prisoner for nearly 40 days, to his intense annoyance. Having a zit that won't go away is an annoyance. Being captured by pirates for 40 days is a problem. He had with him only a physician and 2 valets, having sent the rest of his staff away to borrow the ransom money. Oh, the pinhead. Oh, yes. I look over my right. No. I find him keeping watch very well, to be honest, Steve. He's good company. As soon as the stipulated 50 talents arrived, which make approximately 12,000 gold pieces, and the pirates duly set him ashore, he raised a fleet and went after them, as you do. He had often smilingly sworn, while still in their power, that he would soon capture and crucify them. And this is exactly what he did. He crucified the pirates. Captain Jack Sparrow won't be there for that sequel. Then he continued to Rhodes, but Mithridates was now ravaging the nearby coast of Asia Minor. So to avoid the charge of showing inertia while the allies of Rome were in danger, he raised a force of irregulars and drove Mithridates' deputy from the province, which confirmed the timorous and half-hearted cities of Asia in their allegiance. So this guy was being a pest. He crucified the pirates. He drove them off. He was winning favor in his campaign. There's no valor quite like sea valor. On Caesar's return to Rome, the assembly voted him the rank of colonel, and he vigorously helped their leaders to undo Sulla's legislation by restoring the tribunes of the people to their ancient powers. Then one Plautius introduced a bill for the recall from exile of Caesar's brother-in-law Lucius Cinna, who, with other fellow conspirators, had escaped to Spain after Lepidus's death, and joined Sertorius. Caesar himself spoke in support of the bill, which was passed. Okay, I'm going to see if I can pronounce this correctly. Yes, Stephen. The tiny mic is the real mic. The big mic is just a prop. During his quaestorship in 69 BCE, nice, he made the customary funeral speeches from the rostra in honor of his Aunt Julia and his wife Cornelia, and while eulogizing Julia's maternal and paternal ancestry, did the same for the Caesars too. Her mother, he said, was a descendant of kings, namely the Marcuses Regus, or Marsi. That's how they pluralize it, but I'm going to say Marcuses, a family founded by the Roman king Ancus Marcius, and her father of gods, since the Julians, of which we Caesars are a branch, reckon descent from the goddess Venus. Thus, Julia's stock can claim both the sanctity of kings, who reign supreme among mortals, and the reverence due to gods, who hold even kings in their power. That's a quote worth noting. I wish I had a highlighter on me. I do. I'm going to use that next time I get in a bar fight. Caesar then next married Pompeia, Quintus Pompeius's daughter, who was also Sulla's granddaughter, but divorced her on suspicion of adultery with Publius Clodius. Indeed, so persistent was the rumor of Clodius's having disguised himself as a woman and seduced her at the feast of the good goddess, from which all men are excluded, that the Senate ordered a judicial inquiry into the alleged desecration of these sacred rites. As quaestor, Caesar was appointed to further Spain, where the governor sent him off on an assize circuit. At Gades, he saw a statue of Alexander the Great in the temple of Hercules, and was overheard to sigh impatiently, vexed, it seems, that in an age when Alexander had already conquered the whole world, he himself had done nothing in the least epoch-making. Moreover, when on the following night, much to his dismay, he had a dream of sexually assaulting his own mother, the soothsayers greatly encouraged him by their interpretation of it, namely, that he was destined to conquer the earth, our universal mother. That's how they interpreted it then. They might interpret it that differently today. At all events, he laid down his quaestorship at once, bent on performing some notable act at the first opportunity that offered. He visited the Latin colonists beyond the Po, a river, who were bitterly demanding the same Roman citizenship as that granted to other townsfolk in Italy. Hello, Autumn Panda. No, Stephen. No, not necessary to mention that. That's a reference we can keep quiet. He might have persuaded them to revolt had not the consuls realized the danger and garrisoned that district with the legions recently raised for the Cilician campaign. Not Sicilian, Cilician. Keep it together. Follow along. Item 9. Undiscouraged, Caesar soon made an even more daring attempt at revolution in Rome itself, the capital of all places. A few days before taking up his aedileship in 65 BCE, he was suspected of plotting with Marcus Crassus, an ex-consul, also with Publius Sulla and Lucius Atronius, who had jointly been elected to the consulship but found guilty of bribery and corruption. Politics never changed. These four had agreed to wait until the new year and then attack the Senate House, killing as many senators as convenient. Okay, in some cases, politics do change. Crassus would then proclaim himself dictator and Caesar his master of horse. The government would be reorganized to suit their pleasure. Sulla and Atronius would be appointed consuls. Coffee break. Undiscouraged, Caesar soon made an even more daring attempt at revolution in Rome itself. A few days before taking... Oh, wait, I already read that. Okay, anyways, he had the Senate killed, they took over, and made themselves the leaders. Tenucius Geminus mentions their plot in his history. More information is given in Marcus Bibulus's edicts and in the orations of Gaius Curio the Elder. Another reference to it may be detected in Cicero's letter to Axius, where Caesar is said to have established in his consulship the monarchy which he had planned while only an aedile. Tenucius adds that Crassus was prevented, either by scruples or by nervousness, from appearing at the appointed hour, and Caesar therefore did not give the agreed signal, which, according to Curio, was letting his gown fall and exposing the shoulder. So just a little cheeky shoulder. That was the signal. Both Curio and Marcus Arcturus Naso state that Caesar also plotted with Gnaeus Piso, a young nobleman suspecting of raising a conspiracy in the city, and for that reason appointed governor of Spain. Although he had neither solicited nor qualified for the position, they just gave it to him. Caesar apparently was to lead a revolt in Rome as soon as Piso did so in Spain, and Embrani and the people who lived beyond the Po would have risen simultaneously, but Piso's death canceled the plan. Good luck synchronizing your watches before the invention of watches. No smartphones either. I hate it when you have big plans and a friend dies. Good afternoon, Typhox Empire. No, of course, this isn't Mortar and Ivy. You were stuck in the past. During his aedileship, Caesar filled the Comitium, the Forum, its adjacent basilicas, and the Capitol itself with the display of the material which he meant to use in his public shows, building temporary colonnades for the purpose. He exhibited wild beast hunts and stage plays, some at his own expense from his own pocket, some in cooperation with his colleague Marcus Bibulus, but took all the credit in either case, so that Bibulus remarked openly, "The temple of the heavenly twins in the Forum is always simply called Castors, and I always play Pollux to Caesar's Castor when we give a public entertainment together. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride." That's my own comment, that's not in this. Caesar also put on a gladiatorial show, but had collected so immense a troop of combatants that his terrified political opponents rushed a bill through the House, limiting the number of gladiators that anyone might keep in Rome. Consequently, far fewer pairs fought than had been advertised. Show up to the show, where's all the gladiators? No, Typhox Empire, I'm speaking of the Golden Age. See what I did there? After thus securing the goodwill of the public and their tribunes, Caesar tried to get himself the control of Egypt by popular vote. His excuse for demanding so unusual an appointment was an outcry against the Alexandrians, who had just deposed King Ptolemy XII, although the Senate has recognized him as an ally and friend of Rome. However, the aristocratic party opposed the measure. So, as aedile, Caesar took vengeance by replacing the public monuments, destroyed by Sulla many years ago, that had commemorated Marius's victories over Jugurtha, the Cimbri, and the Teutones. Further, as judge of the court of inquiry into murder, he prosecuted men who had earned public bounties for bringing in the heads of Roman citizens outlawed during the proscriptions. Although his rough justice had been expressly sanctioned in the Cornelian laws. Based, more like basic. Thanks, Mom. Not my mom, Chef and Awesome's mom. He also bribed a man to bring a charge of high treason against Gaius Rabirius, who some years previously had earned the Senate's gratitude by checking the seditious activities of Lucius Saturninus, a tribune. Caesar, chosen by lot to try Rabirius, pronounced the sentence with such satisfaction that when Rabirius appealed to the people, the greatest argument in his favor was the judge's obvious prejudice. I don't know, can a judge have prejudice? Can you prejudge if you are a judge? In the comments, let me know. Obliged to abandon his ambition of governing Egypt, Caesar stood for the office of chief priest and used the most flagrant bribery to secure it. The story goes that reckoning up the enormous debts thus contracted, he told his mother as she kissed him goodbye on the morning of the poll that if he did not return to her as chief priest, he would not return at all. However, he defeated his more prominent rivals, both of whom were much older and more distinguished than himself, and the votes he won from their own tribes exceeded those cast for them in the entire poll. What Caesar is best? That'd be the Southwest Caesar, Ty Fox Empire. The Southwest Caesar is the best Caesar. It's got that zesty zip, that zang, that tang. When the Catilinarian conspiracy came to light, the whole house, with the sole exception of Caesar, then praetor-elect, no longer aedile, demanded the death penalty for Catiline and his associates. Caesar proposed merely that they should be imprisoned, each in a different town, and their estates confiscated. What was more, he so browbeat those senators who took a sterner line by suggesting that the commons would conceive an enduring hatred for them if they persisted in this view, that Decimus Silanus, as consul-elect, felt obliged to interpret his own proposal, which, however, he could not bring himself to recast, in a more liberal sense, begging Caesar not to misread it so savagely. Sounds more like Little Caesar. Well, at this point, he was Little Caesar. He had not advanced to being Caesar Maximus, Maximum Caesar. Caesar would have gained his point since many senators, including the consul Cicero's brother, had been won over to this view. Had Marcus Cato not kept the irresolute Senate in line, Caesar continued to block proceedings until a body of Roman knights, serving as a defense force to the house, threatened to kill him unless he ceased his violent opposition. They even unsheathed their swords and made such passes at him that most of his companions fled, and the remainder huddled around, protecting him with their arms or their gowns. He was sufficiently impressed not only to leave the house, but to keep away from it for the rest of that year. Yes, grilled Caesar is good too. But when crispy's an option, you can't go grilled. On the first day of his praetorship, we are in 62 BCE, Caesar ordered Quintus Catulus to appear before the assembly and explained why he had made so little progress with the restoration of the capital, demanding that Catulus's commission should be taken from him and entrusted instead to another. However, the senators of the aristocratic party, who were escorting the newly elected consuls to their inaugural sacrifice in the capital, as in they're going to make their sacrifice, they're not sacrificing the consuls, just to be clear. He heard what was afoot and came pouring downhill in a body to offer obstinate resistance. Caesar withdrew his proposal. We are now on to page 7. I shall pour myself more hot bean water. Oh, spilled a little. That's okay. Stephen, that is an apt celebration plan. Apt. Ty Fox Empire asks, when does Tiberius show up? Tiberius always shows up unannounced when his host is unready and undressed. Never at the opportune moment. Caecilius Metellus, a tribune of the people, then defended his colleague's veto by bringing in some highly inflammatory bills, and Caesar stubbornly championed them on the floor of the house until at last Metellus and himself were suspended by a senatorial decree. Unless he had the effrontery to continue holding his office and his court. until warned that he would be removed by force. Thereupon he dismissed his lictors, took off his praetorian robe. And then went quickly home, where he had decided to live in retirement because the times allowed him no other alternative. Caesar had had it. He was exhausted by the Senate's refusal to step in line. On the following day, however, the populace made a spontaneous move toward Caesar's house, riotously offering to put him back in his post, but he restrained their ardor. The Senate, who had hurriedly met to deal with the demonstration, were so surprised by his unexpectedly correct attitude that they sent a deputation of high officials to thank him publicly, then summoned him to the house, where, with warm praises, they revoked their decree and confirmed him in his praetorship. You're hoping for military glory. This is all it's politics. That's all it is. But it's important. The next danger that threatened Caesar was the inclusion of his name in a list of Catilinarian conspirators handed to the special commissioner, Novius Niger, by an informer named Lucius Vettius, and also in another list laid before the Senate by Quintus Curius, who had been voted a public bounty as the first person to betray the plot. The plot, not the pot. Curius claimed that his information came directly from Catiline, and Vettius went so far as to declare that he could produce a letter written to Catiline in Caesar's own hand. He may have just been a master forger. Caesar would not lie down under this insult and appealed to Cicero's own admission that he had voluntarily come forward to warn him about the plot, and that Curius, that's his name. Curius was not therefore entitled to the bounty. As for Vettius, who had been obliged to produce a bond when he made his revelations, this was declared forfeit and his goods seized. The commons, crowding around the rostra, nearly tore him in pieces. That's almost the opposite. Caesar thereupon sent Vettius off to jail, and Novius Niger, the commissioner, as well, for having let a magistrate of superior rank to himself be indicted at his tribunal. All right, we're heading back to Spain. Yes, happy Ides of March, everybody. Prematurely speaking, that is why we are reading this selection. We are to celebrate, commemorate. We're going to say commemorate the death and assassination of Caesar. We're in Spain. The province of Further Spain was now allotted to Caesar. He relieved himself of the creditors who tried to keep him in Rome until he had paid his debts, by providing sureties for their eventual settlement. Then he took the illegal and unprecedented step of hurrying off before the Senate had either formally confirmed his appointment or voted him the necessary funds. He may have been afraid of being impeached while still a private citizen, or he may have been anxious to respond as quickly as possible to the appeals of our Spanish allies for help against aggression. At any rate, on his arrival in Spain, he rapidly restored order and returned to Rome in the following summer with equal haste, not waiting until he had been relieved, to demand a triumph and stand for the consulship. But the day of the consular elections had already been announced. His candidacy could therefore not be admitted unless he entered the city as a civilian, and when a general outcry arose against his intrigues to be exempted from the regulations governing candidatures, he was faced with the alternative of foregoing the triumph or foregoing the consulship. To answer your question, Tyfox Empire, what possessed me to do a live stream is because I enjoy it, and also because it racks up my viewing hours. This is my chance to I can't think of the word. I hope I thought of it while I sipped that coffee, but it didn't kill enough time. Interacting. It's my way of interacting with people live. But mostly because I enjoy it. Okay. In terms of the consulship and its election, there were two other candidates, Lucius and Marcus Bibulus. Caesar now approached it's not Lucius, it's Lucius. Lucius Lucius. Caesar now approached Lucius and suggested that they should join forces. I propose we form an alliance, he said. But since Lucius had more money and Caesar greater influence, it was agreed that Lucius should finance their joint candidacy by bribing the voters. The aristocratic party got wind of this arrangement, and fearing that if Caesar were elected consul with a pliant colleague by his side, he would stop at nothing to gain his own ends. They authorized Marcus Bibulus to bribe the voters as heavily as Lucius had done. Many aristocrats contributed to Bibulus's campaign funds, and Cato himself admitted that this was an occasion when even bribery might be excused, a legitimate means of preserving the constitution. Caesar and Bibulus were elected consuls. Big surprise there. But the aristocrats continued to restrict Caesar's influence by ensuring that when he and Bibulus had completed their term, both should govern provinces of the smallest possible importance. Designated as woods and mountain pastures. Infuriated by this slight, what an insult, I would take it as such, Caesar exerted his charm on Pompey, who had quarreled with the Senate because they were so slow in improving the steps that he had taken to defeat King Mithridates of Pontus. He succeeded in conciliating Pompey and Marcus Crassus. They were still at odds after their failure to agree on matters of policy while sharing the consulship. Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus now formed a triple pact, jointly swearing to oppose all legislations of which any of them might disapprove. Did they have filibusters in this day? Comment below if you know of anything about ancient Roman filibusters. Yes, the next live stream will be about Winger, Tyfox Empire. By the way, their last album, I think 2021, was fire. Caesar's first act as consul was to rule that a daily record of proceedings in the Senate and in the people's court should be taken and published. He also revived the obsolete custom of having an orderly walk before him during the months in which his colleague held the rods of office, which the lictors marched behind. They still do that in Great Britain. Next, he introduced an agrarian law, and when Bibulus delayed its passage through the Senate by announcing that the omens were unfavorable, drove him from the forum by force of arms. On the following day, Bibulus lodged a complaint in the House, and when nobody dared move a vote of censure or make any observation on the scandalous event, though decrees condemning minor breaches of the peace had often been passed, he felt so distrusted that he stayed home for the rest of his term, satisfying his resentment with further announcements about unfavorable omens. Caesar was thus enabled to govern alone and do very much as he pleased. It became a joke to sign and seal bogus documents, executed during the consulship of Julius and Caesar, rather than during the consulship of Bibulus and Caesar. And thus this lampoon went the rounds. The event occurred, as I recall, when Caesar governed Rome. Caesar, not Marcus Bibulus, who kept his seat at home. The plain called Stellus had been devoted to public purposes in earlier times, and the Campanian territory had also been set aside and farmed on behalf of the government. Caesar partitioned both these districts among fathers of 3 or more children without casting the customary lots. When the Roman tax farmers asked for relief, he canceled 1/3 of their obligations, but gave them frank warning not to bid too high for the contracts in future. He freely granted all other pleas whatsoever, and either met with no opposition or intimidated anyone who dared intervene. Marcus Cato once tried to delay proceedings by talking out the debate, but Caesar had him forcibly ejected by a lictor and led off to prison. That sounds like a filibuster to me. That might have answered my questions. He went to prison for that. Lucius Lucullus went a little too far in opposing Caesar's policy, whereupon Caesar so terrified him by threats of prosecution that Lucullus fell on his knees and begged Caesar's pardon. Hearing that Cicero had been making a doleful speech in court about the evils of his times, Caesar at once granted the long-standing plea of Cicero's enemy, Publius Clodius, to be transferred from patrician to plebeian rank. Rushing this measure through the House at 3 o'clock, just before the adjournment. Finally, he began an attack on his aristocratic opponents as a body by bribing an informer who appeared on the rostra and announced that some of them had tried to make him assassinate Pompey. As had been arranged, the informer mentioned a few names, but the whole affair raised such strong suspicions of double dealing that Caesar, realizing that he had been too hasty, is said to have poisoned his agent. Maybe next time. I know there's a lot of Roman names spouting. You can just picture the same guy. They're all the same guy. There's Caesar and then just a Roman guy, and it makes no difference. Caesar then married Calpurnia, daughter of Lucius Piso. Calpurnia, that was her name. Remember, that was her name. Now I remember. His successor to the consulship, and at the same time betrothed Julia to Pompey, thus breaking her previous engagement to Servilius Scipio, who had recently given him a great deal of support in the struggle against Bibulus. He now always called on Pompey to open debates in the House, though having hitherto reserved this honor for Crassus, thereby flouting the tradition that a council should continue throughout the year to preserve the order of precedence established for speakers on New Year's Day. Having thus secured the goodwill of his father-in-law Piso and his son-in-law Pompey, Caesar surveyed the many provinces open to him and chose Gaul as being the likeliest to supply him with wealth and triumphs. True, he was at first appointed governor only of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyria. The proposal came from Vatinius, but afterwards the Senate added Transalpine Gaul to his jurisdiction, fearing that if he were to deny him, the commons would insist that he should have it. His elation was so that he could not refrain from boasting to a packed house some days later that having now gained his dearest wish, to the annoyance and grief of his opponents, he would proceed to stamp upon their persons. When someone interjected with a sneer that a woman would not find this an easy feat, he answered amicably, "Why not? Semiramis was the supreme in Syria, and the Amazons once ruled over a large part of Asia." So, yeah, Caesar was a feminist, I suppose. Pro-women. Okay, let's get that in order. Take a sip. Welcome back to the channel. If you just tuned in, we are reading 12 Lives of the Caesar by Suetonius, specifically the chapter on Julius Caesar, in commemoration of the Ides of March. At the close of his consulship, the praetors Gaius Memmius and Lucius Demetrius demanded an inquiry into his official conduct during the past year. Caesar referred the matter to the Senate, who would not discuss it, so after 3 days had been wasted in idle recriminations, he left for Gaul. His quaestor was at once charged with various irregularities. Hold it together, we're all adults here. With various irregularities, that makes it worse, as a first step toward his own impeachment. Then Lucius Anticius, a tribune of the people, arraigned Caesar, who, however, appealed to the whole college of tribunes, pleaded absence on business of national importance, and thus staved off the trial. To prevent a recurrence of this sort of trouble, he made a point of putting the chief magistrates of each new year under some obligation to him, and refusing to support any candidates, or allow them to be elected, unless they promised to defend his cause while he was absent from Rome. He had no hesitation in holding some of them to the promises by an oath, or even a written contract. At last, Lucius Domitius stood for the consulship and openly threatened that, once elected, he would remove Caesar from his military command, having failed to do so while praetor. So Caesar called upon Pompey and Crassus to visit Lucca. which lay in the province, and there persuaded them to prolong his governorship of Gaul for another 5 years, and to oppose Domitius's candidature. This success encouraged Caesar to expand his regular army with legions raised at his own expense. One even recruited in Transalpine Gaul and called a lauda Gallic for the crested lark, which he trained and equipped in Roman style. Later, he made every lauda legionary a full citizen. He now lost no opportunity on picking quarrels, however unfair and dangerous, with allies, as well as hostile and barbarous tribes, and marching against them. He had his own army, why not? At first, the Senate set up a commission of inquiry into the state of the Gallic provinces, and some speakers went so far as to recommend that Caesar should be handed over to the enemy. But the more successful his campaigns, the more frequent the public thanksgivings voted, and the holidays that went with them were longer any general had ever earned. Briefly, his 9 years' governorship produced the following results. He reduced to the form of a province the whole of Gaul, enclosed by the Pyrenees, the Alps, the Cevennes, the Rhine, and the Rhone, about 640,000 square miles, except for certain allied states which had given him useful support, and exacted an annual tribute of 400,000 gold pieces. Caesar was the first Roman to build a military bridge across the Rhine and caused the Germans on the farther bank heavy losses. He also invaded Britain, as we know, a hitherto unknown country, and defeated the natives there, from whom he exacted a large sum of money as well as hostages for future good behavior. He met with only 3 serious reverses. In Britain, when his fleet was all but destroyed by a gale. In Gaul, when one of his legions was routed at Gergovia among the Auvergne Mountains. Auvergne Mountains, not an eggplant. And on the German frontier, when his generals Titurius and another fellow were ambushed and killed. During these 9 years, Caesar lost, one after the other, his mother, his daughter, and his grandson. Meanwhile, the assassination of Publius Clodius had caused such an outcry that the Senate voted for the appointment of only a single consul, naming Pompey as their choice. When the tribunes of the people wanted Caesar to stand as Pompey's colleague, Caesar asked whether they would not persuade his commons to let him do so without visiting Rome. His governorship of Gaul, he wrote, was nearly at an end, and he preferred not to leave until his conquests had been completed. The granting of this concession so fired Caesar's ambitions that he neglected no expense in winning popularity, both as a private citizen and as a candidate for his second consulship. He began building a new forum, with the spoils taken in Gaul, and paid more than 1,000,000 gold pieces for this site alone. Then he announced a gladiatorial show and a public banquet in memory of his fallen daughter Julia, an unprecedented event, and to create as much excitement among the commons as possible, had the banquet catered for partly by his own household, partly by the market contractors. After all, a big party makes everybody happy and persuades them to look the other way. Let's see what happens next. He also issued an order that any well-known gladiator who failed to win the approval of the circus should be forcibly rescued from execution and kept alive. New gladiators were also trained not by the usual professionals in the schools, but in private houses by Roman knights, and even senators who happened to be masters at arms. Letters of his survive, begging these trainers to give their pupils individual instruction in the art of fighting. He fixed the daily pay of the regular soldiers at double what it had been for all time, in perpetuity. Whenever the granaries were full, he would make a lavish distribution to the army, without measuring the amount, and occasionally gave every man a Gallic slave. To preserve Pompey's friendship and renew the family ties dissolved by Julia's death, he offered him the hand of his sister's granddaughter, Octavia, though she had already married Gaius Marcellus, and in return asked leave to marry Pompey's daughter, who was betrothed to Faustus Sulla. Having now won all Pompey's friends, and most of the Senate to his side with loans at a low rate of interest, or interest-free in some cases, he endeared himself to persons of less distinction too, by handing out valuable presents, whether or not they asked for them or not. His beneficiaries included the favorite slaves or freedmen of prominent men. So it's like in one hand, oh, what a nice guy, giving them presents. And the other hand, oh, some of those presents were slaves. Caesar thus became the one reliable source of help to all who were in legal difficulties, or in debt, or living beyond their means, and refused help only to those whose criminal record was so black, or whose purse was so empty, or whose tastes were so expensive that even he could do nothing for them. He frankly told such people, what you need is a civil war. On DVD. Caesar took equal pains to win the esteem of kings and provincial authorities by offering them gifts of prisoners, thousands at a time, or lending them troops whenever they asked, and without first obtaining official permission from the Senate or people. He also presented the principal cities of Asia and Greece with magnificent public works, and did the same for those of Italy, Gaul, and Spain. Everyone was amazed by this liberality and wondered what the sequel would be. So he was mega rich now. That was his superpower. And that's what won everybody's favor. Not only was he rich, but he was just giving out his money. If only current super rich leaders would do the same. At last, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the consul, announced in the House they intended to raise a matter of vital public interest, and then proposed that since the Gallic War had now ended and peace was restored, Caesar should be relieved of his command before his term as governor-general expired, that a successor should be appointed, and that the armies in Gaul should be disbanded. He further proposed that Caesar should be forbidden to stand for the consulship without appearing at Rome in person, since a decree against irregularities of this sort should still appear on the statute book. That doesn't sound like a very popular idea. Let's see how that goes over. Here Marcellus was on firm legal ground. Pompey, when he introduced a bill regulating the privileges of state officials, had omitted to make a special exception for Caesar in the clause debarring absentees from candidacy. Or, to correct this oversight before the bill had been passed, engraved on a bronze tablet and registered in the public treasury. Nor was Marcellus content to oust Caesar from his command and cancel the privilege already voted him, namely to stand for the consulship in absentia. He also asked that the colonists whom Caesar had settled at Novum Comum under the Vatinian Act should lose their citizenship. This award, he said, had been intended to further Caesar's political ambitions and lacked legal sanction. This coffee's starting to hit pretty dry. It's here to keep my voice going. We'll see how long it lasts. The news infuriated Caesar, but he had often been reported as saying, now I'm the leading. Now, let's take another sip, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. We're reading the 12 Lives of the Caesars, particularly the chapter on Julius Caesar, written in 69 CE by Suetonius. Okay. The news infuriated Caesar, that being the news of Pompey's legal actions. But he had often been reported as saying, now that I am the leading Roman of my day, it will be harder to put down a peg than to degrade me to the ranks. So he resisted stubbornly, persuading the tribunes of the people to veto Marcellus's bills, and at the same time enlisting the help of Servius Sulpicius, Marcellus's colleague. When in the following year Marcellus was succeeded in office by his cousin Gaius, who adopted a similar policy, Caesar again won over the other consul, Aemilius Paulus, we'll call him Paul, with a heavy bribe, and also bought Gaius Curio, the most energetic tribune of the people. Realizing, however, that the opposition had made a determined stand and that both the new consuls elect were unfriendly to him, he appealed to the Senate again, begging them in a written address not to cancel a privilege voted to him by commons, without forcing all other governor generals to resign their commands at the same time as he did. But this was read as meaning that he counted on mobilizing his veteran troops sooner than Pompey could his raw levies. Next, Caesar offered to resign command of 8 legions and quit Transalpine Gaul if he might keep 2 legions and the Cisalpine Gaul, or at least Illyricum and 1 legion, until he became consul. Since the Senate refused to intervene on his behalf and his opponents insisted that they could accept no compromise in a matter of such national importance, Caesar crossed into Cisalpine Gaul, where he held his regular assizes, and halted at Ravenna. He was resolved to invade Italy if force were used against the tribunes of the people who had vetoed the Senate's decree disbanding his army by a given date. Force was, in effect, used, and the tribunes fled towards Cisalpine Gaul, which became Caesar's pretext for launching the civil war. Additional motives were suspected, however. Pompey's comment was that because Caesar had insufficient capital to carry out his grandiose schemes, or give the people all that they had been encouraged to expect on his return, he chose to create an atmosphere of political confusion. My lips started to go down. Another view is that he dreaded having to account for the irregularities of his first consulship, during which he had disregarded auspices and vetoes, for Marcus Cato had often sworn to impeach him as soon as the legions were disbanded. More reason not to disband the legions. Moreover, people said at the time, frankly enough, that should Caesar return from Gaul as a private citizen, he would be tried in court, ringed around with armed men. This seems to be a recurring theme, as Titus Annius Milo had lately been at Pompey's orders in 52 BCE. This sounds plausible enough because Asinius Pollio records in his history that when Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus saw his enemies forced to choose between massacre and flight, he said in these very words, "They brought it on themselves. They would have condemned me regardless of all my victories, me, Gaius Caesar, that had I not appealed to my army for help." It was also been suggested that constant exercise of power gave Caesar a love of it, and that after weighing his enemy's strength against his own, he took this chance by fulfilling his youthful dreams by making a bid for the monarchy. Bubbly drinks. No, yes, Chef and Officer. That would create a lot of, like a beer. I've done that before in the past. It would create a lot of interruptions. Cicero seems to have come to a similar conclusion. In the third book of his Essays on Duties, he records that Caesar quoted the following lines from Euripides' Phoenician Women on several occasions. "Is crime consonant with nobility? Then noblest is the crime of tyranny. In all things else obey the laws of heaven." Solid logic there. Accordingly, when news reached him that the tribune's veto had been disallowed and that they had fled the city, he at once sent a few cohorts ahead with all secrecy, and disarmed suspicion of himself attending a theatrical performance, inspecting the plans of a school for gladiators which he proposed to build, and dining as usual among a crowd of guests. But at dusk he borrowed a pair of mules from a bakery near headquarters, harnessed them to a gig, and set off quietly with a few of his staff. His lights went out, he lost his way, and the party wandered around aimlessly for some hours, but at dawn found a guide who led them on foot along narrow lanes until they came to the right road. Caesar overtook his advanced guard at the river Rubicon, which formed the frontier between Gaul and Italy. Well aware how critical a decision confronted him, he turned to his staff, remarking, "We may still draw back, but once across that little bridge, we shall have to fight it out." As he stood in two minds, an apparition of superhuman size and beauty was seen sitting on the riverbank playing a reed pipe. A party of shepherds gathered around to listen, and when some of Caesar's men, including some of the trumpeters, broke ranks to do the same, the apparition snatched a trumpet from one of them, ran down to the river, blew a thunderous blast, and crossed over. Caesar exclaimed, "Let us accept this as a sign from the from the gods, of course, and follow where they beckon in vengeance upon our double-dealing enemies. The die is cast." I love that. Man was never at a 6, always at a 10. The die is cast. He led his army to the farther bank, where he welcomed the tribunes of the people who had fled to him from Rome. Then he tearfully addressed the troops, and ripping open his tunic to expose his breast, begged them to stand faithfully by him. The belief that he had then promised to promote every man present to the equestrian order is based on a misunderstanding. He had accompanied his pleas with a gesture of pointing to his left hand, as he declared that he would gladly reward those who championed his honor with the very seal ring from his thumb. But some soldiers on the fringe of the assembly, who saw him better than they could hear his words, read too much into this gesture. They put it about that Caesar had promised them all the right to wear a knight's gold ring, and the 4,000 gold pieces required to support a knighthood. I guess listen better. That's a strong assumption. Here follows a brief account of Caesar's subsequent movements. He occupied Picenum, Umbria, and Etruria, captured Lucius Domitius, who had been illegally named as a successor in Gaul, and was holding Corfinium for the Senate. Let him go free, and then marched along the Adriatic coast to Brandisium. All these words are twisting my tongue, my God. Next time, live reading, I'll read A is for Apple. He marched along the Adriatic coast to Brandisium, where Pompey and the consuls had fled from Rome on their way to Epirus. When his efforts to prevent their crossing the straits proved ineffective, he marched on Rome, entered it, summoned the Senate to review the political situation, and then hurriedly set off for Spain. Pompey's strongest forces were stationed there under the command of his friends Marcus Petrius, Lucius Afranius, and Marcus Varro. Before leaving, Caesar told his household, "I am off to meet an army without a leader. When I return, I shall meet a leader without an army." Though delayed by the siege of Massilia, which had shut its gates against him, and by failure of his commissariat, he won a rapid and overwhelming victory. Caesar returned by way of Rome, crossed the Adriatic, and after blockading Pompey for nearly 4 months behind immense containing works, routed him at Pharsalus in Thessaly. Pompey fled to Alexandria. Caesar followed, and when he found that King Ptolemy XIII had murdered Pompey and was planning to murder him as well, declared war. Yeah, as you do. This proved to be a most difficult campaign, awkward both in time and place, fought during winter within the city walls of a well-equipped and cunning enemy. But though caught off his guard and without military supplies of any kind, Caesar was victorious. He then handed over the government of Egypt to Queen Cleopatra and her younger brother, fearing that if made a Roman province, it might one day be held against his fellow countrymen by some independent-minded governor-general. From Alexandria, he proceeded to Syria, and from Syria to Pontus, news having come that Pharnaces, son of the famous Mithridates, had taken advantage of the confused situation and already gained several successes. 5 days after his arrival, and 4 hours after catching sight of Pharnaces, Caesar won a crushing victory, and commented dryly on Pompey's good fortunes in having built up his reputation for generalship by victories over such poor stuff as this. Then he beat Scipio and King Juba in North Africa, where his remnants of the Pompeian party were being reorganized, and Pompey's 2 sons in Spain. Throughout the civil war, Caesar was never defeated himself, but of his generals, Gaius Curio was killed fighting in North Africa, Gaius Antonius was captured off another place. Publius Dolabella lost another fleet off that same place. Gnaeus Domitius Calvinus had his army destroyed in Pontus. Yet, though invariably successful, he twice came close to disaster. At Dyrrhachium, where Pompey broke his blockade and forced him to retreat, Caesar remarked when Pompey failed to pursue him, "He does not know how to win wars." And in the final battle, when all seemed lost, and even considered suicide. After defeating Scipio, Caesar celebrated 4 triumphs in 1 month, within a few days' interval between them, and after defeating the sons of Pompey, a 5th. These triumphs were the Pontic, the African, and lastly, the Spanish. Each differed completely from the others in its presentation, details of which we are not presented. This coffee maker is casting a wide shadow on me. I should have moved the light. It's too late now. We're neck deep in this. As Caesar rode through the Velabrum on the day of his Gallic triumph, the axle of his triumphal chariot broke, and he nearly took a toss. The axle of his triumphal chariot broke. I already read that. But afterwards ascended to the Capitol between 2 lines of elephants, 40 in all, which acted as his torchbearers. In the Pontic triumph, one of which had decorative wagons, instead of a stage set representing scenes from the war, like the rest, carried a simple 3-word inscription. We all know what it is. Say it aloud in the comments. What is the 3-word inscription that Caesar famously uttered? Any takers? Anybody know? Anybody know? I can be in the English version or the Latin version. This is a quiz. You're being quizzed by the professor, ladies and germs. Yes, thank you, Chef and S. Awesome. We will fix it in post. There is no post. Uh-oh. A message is held for reviewed. It's probably Veni Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. That's what it should be. Whatever you put that put the message in review is probably rude. We're not here for rude comments, although I'm sure Caesar was full of rude comments. I came, I saw, I conquered. This referred not to the events of the war, like the other inscriptions, but to the speed with which it had been won. Every infantryman of Caesar's veteran legions earned a war gratuity of 240 gold pieces, not quite 4,000, but not too shabby, in addition to the 20 paid at the outbreak of hostilities, and a farm. These farms could not be grouped together without evicting former owners, but were scattered all across the countryside. Every member of the commons received 10 packs of gum, 10... My deepest apologies. They each received 10 packs of grain, not 10 packs of gum. Ooh, eyes are starting to cross. Every member of the commons received 10 packs of grain and 10 pounds of oil as a bounty, beside the 3 gold pieces which Caesar had promised at first, and now raised to 4 by way of interest on the delay in payment. He added a popular banquet and a distribution of meat, also a dinner to celebrate his Spanish victory, but decided that this had not been splendid enough, and 5 days later served a second, more succulent one. Okay, so as a boss, how is Caesar? Victory after victory, he's winning every single battle that he's leading across the Mediterranean, in Egypt and in Spain and in Gaul. He's giving all of his soldiers bonuses, their leaders bigger bonuses. Everybody gets a farm, everybody gets grain. How could you not like the guy? More coffee. Okay. And then he threw them all a pizza party, and the pizza wasn't good, so he threw them a bigger pizza party. If you are an employer of employees, take note. His public shows were of great variety. They included a gladiatorial contest, stage plays for every Roman ward performed in several languages, chariot races at the circus, athletic competitions, and a mock naval battle. At the gladiatorial contest in the Forum, a man named Furius Leptinus of Praetorian family fought Quintus Calpinus, a barrister and former senator, to the death. The sons of leaders of Asia and Bithynia danced the Pyrrhic sword dance. One of the plays was written and acted by Decimus Liberius, a Roman knight. After the performance, he was given 5,000 gold pieces and had his gold ring, the badge of equestrian rank, restored to him, so that he would walk straight from stage to orchestra, where 14 rows of seats were reserved for the order. A broad ditch had been dug around the racecourse, now extended at either end of the circus, and the contestants were young noblemen who drove 4-horse and 2-horse chariots or rode pairs of horses, jumping from back to back. The so-called Troy game, a sham fight supposedly introduced by Aeneas, was performed by 2 troops of boys, one younger than the other. Pizza, bread and circuses, and yes, Chef in Austin, he gave his girlfriend a country that certainly beats chlamydia. Chlamydia maxima, the daughter. Wild beast hunts took place 5 days running, and then the entertainment ended with a battle between 2 armies, each consisting of 500 infantry, 20 elephants, and 30 cavalry. To let the camps be pitched facing each other, and Caesar removed the central barrier of the circus, around which the chariots ran. Athletic contests were held in temporary stadium on the Campus Martius, and lasted for 3 days. The naval battle was fought at an artificial lake dug in the Lesser Codetta, between Tyrian and Egyptian ships, with 2, 3, or 4 banks of oars, and heavily manned. Such huge numbers of visitors flocked to these shows from all directions that many of them had to sleep in tents pitched along the streets or roads, or on rooftops, wherever, and often the pressure of the crowd crushed people to death, the victims including 2 senators. Caesar next turned his attention to domestic reforms. Okay, enough celebrations, enough battles, we're back to politics. First, he reorganized the calendar, which the College of Priests had allowed to fall into such disorder by inserting days or months as it suited them. They didn't know what the day was or what season it was, that the harvest and vintage festivals no longer corresponded with the right seasons. He linked the year to the course of the sun by lengthening it to 365 days. Another message held for review. Someone out there, hold your tongue. He abolished the short extra month and added an entire day to every 4th year. So Caesar gave us the leap year. Or the leap day, I should say. But to make the next 1st of January fall at the right season, he drew out this particular year, that being 46 BCE, by 2 extra months, inserting between November and December, so that it consisted of 15, including the intercalary one inserted after February in the old style. I think there used to be like a month that was only like a week long or 2 weeks long or something like that. That it had to go. He brought the Senate up to strength by creating new patricians and increased the yearly quota of praetors, aedles, and quaestors, as well as of minor officials, reinstating those degraded by the censors or condemned for corruption by a jury. Also, he arranged with the commons, apart from the consul, half the magistrates should be popular elected and half nominated by himself, allowing even the sons of proscribed men to stand. He circulated brief directions to the voters. For instance, Caesar, the dictator, to such and such tribe of voters, I recommend so-and-so to you in your office. As in, what's the expression they say at the end of all the commercials? I approve this message. We'll say that. He limited jury service to knights and senators, disqualifying the treasury tribunes. I mean, we call him such a dictator, and yet he's creating all these publicly elected seats that weren't there before and reinstating the old ones that were canceled out. That doesn't sound like a dictator to me. That sounds like a very democratic guy. Do note the tone of my voice. Caesar changed the old method of registering voters. He made the city landlords help him to complete the list street by street and reduced from 320,000 to 150,000 the number of householders who might draw free grain. To do away with the nuisance of having to summon everyone for enrollment periodically, he made the praetors keep the register up to date by replacing the names of dead men with those of others not yet listed. Since the population of Rome had been considerably diminished by the transfer of 80,000 men to overseas colonies, he forbade any citizen between the age of 20 and 40 who was not serving the army to absent himself from Italy for more than 3 years in succession. Nor might any senator's son travel abroad unless as a member of some magistrate's household or staff, and at least a third of the cattlemen employed by graziers had to be freeborn. Caesar also granted the citizenship to all medical practitioners and professors of liberal arts resident in Rome, thus inducing them to remain and tempting others to follow suit. Here he was preventing, what's the term that we use for when jobs go overseas? Oh, my brain, I've got coffee brain right now. It is currently 7. It's not 7. It's currently, it's quarter after 7, but it's quarter after 1900. I think I shall proceed for another 20 minutes. If you're just tuning in, I'm reading Suetonius' 12 Lives of the Caesars, specifically the chapter on Julius Caesar. I have with me coffee and your company. He disappointed popular agitators by canceling no debts, but in the end decreed that every debtor should have his property assessed according to the pre-war valuation, and after deducting the interest already paid directly, or by way of a banker's guarantee, should satisfy his creditors with whatever sum that might represent. This left debtors with perhaps a fourth part of their property. Caesar dissolved all workers' guilds except the ancient ones. Oh, he's busting up unions, you guys. And increased the penalties for crime. And since wealthy men had no less compunctions about committing major offenses, because the worst that could happen to him was a sentence of exile, he punished murderers of fellow citizens, as Cicero records, by the seizure of either their entire property or half of it. In his administration of justice, he was both conscientious and severe, and went so far as to degrade senators found guilty of extortion. Once, when an ex-praetor married a woman on the day after divorce from another man, he annulled the union, although adultery between them was not suspected. He imposed a tariff on foreign manufacturers, forbade the use, except on stated occasions, of litters and the wearing of either scarlet robes or pearls by those below a certain rank and age. To implement his laws against luxury, he placed inspectors in different parts of the market to seize delicacies offered for sale in violation of his orders. Sometimes he even sent lictors and guards into dining rooms to remove illegal dishes already served with which his watchmen had failed to intercept. Imagine Caesar coming in and taking your dinner, all because it has haggis or black pudding in it, or some other illegal dish. Caesar continually undertook great new works for the embellishment of the city, or for the empire's protection and enlargement. His first projects were a temple of Mars, the biggest in the world, to build, which he would have to fill up and pave the lake where the naval sham fight had been staged, and an enormous theater sloping down from the Tarpeian rock on the Capitoline Hill. Another task he set himself was the reduction of the civil code to manageable proportions, by selecting from the unwieldy mass of statutes only the most essential, and publishing them in a few volumes. Still another was to provide the finest possible public libraries, by commissioning Marcus Varro to collect and classify Greek and Latin books. His engineering schemes included the draining of the Pomptine marshes and of Lake Fucinius, also a highway running from the Adriatic across the Apennines to the Tiber. and a canal to be cut through the Isthmus of Corinth. Also, a highway running from the Adriatic across the Apennines. Oh, I just read that. Follow along. Keep up. In the military field, he planned an expulsion of the Dacians from the Black Sea area and Thrace, where they had recently occupied, and then an attack on Parthia by way of Lesser Armenia, but decided not to risk a pitched battle until he had familiarized himself with Parthian tactics. All these schemes were cancelled by his assassination. There it is. He had so many big plans. Highways, draining lakes, paving over lakes. Before describing that, I should perhaps give a brief description of his appearance, personal habits, dress, character, and conduct, and piece of war. Man, I want to get straight to the assassination. No, before we discuss the assassination, we must discover his bathrobe. Okay. We must be careful with this. Oh, well, that's going to stay there. I don't know if you can see Justice in the scene. No. Okay. Justice is out of frame. In fact, let's bring Justice into frame, everybody. Justice needs to be in frame. Perfect. Okay. Caesar is said to have been tall, fair, and well built, with a rather broad face and keen dark brown eyes. His health was sound, apart from sudden comas and a tendency to nightmares which troubled him toward the end of his life. But he twice had epileptic fits while on campaign. He was something of a dandy, always keeping his head carefully trimmed and shaved, and has been accused of having certain other hairy parts of his body deforested with tweezers. His baldness was a disfigurement which his enemies harped upon, much to his exasperation, but he used to comb the thin strands of hair forward from his poll. And of all the honors voted him by Senate and the people, none pleased him so much as the privilege of wearing a laurel wreath on all occasions. He constantly took advantage of it. There you go, you heard it from the horse's mouth. Caesar hid his comb-over and bald spot with the laurel wreath. That was its purpose. His dress was, it seems, unusual. He added wrist-length sleeves with fringes to his purple-striped senatorial tunic, and the belt with which he wore over it was never tightly fastened. Hence Sulla's warning to the aristocratic party, "Beware of that boy with the loose clothes." Caesar's first home was a modest house in the Subura quarter, but later, as chief pontiff, he used the official residence on the Sacred Way. Contemporary literatures contain frequent references to his fondness for luxurious living, having built a country mansion at Nemus from the foundations up. One story goes he found certain features in it to dislike, so that although poor at the time and heavily in debt, he tore the whole place down. Could have just sold it, my guy. It is also recorded that he carried tessellated and mosaic pavements with him on his campaigns. Pearls seem to have been the lure that prompted his invasion of Britain. He would sometimes weigh them in the palm of his hand to judge their value, and was also a keen collector of gems, carvings, statues, and old masters. So high were the prices he paid for slaves of good appearance and attainments, they became ashamed of his extravagance and would not allow the sums to be entered into his accounts. I also find that while stationed abroad, he always had dinner served in two separate rooms, one for his officers and Greek friends, the other for Roman citizens and the more important provincials. He paid such strict attention to his domestic economy, however small the detail, they once put his baker in irons for giving him a different sort of bread for committing different sort of bread that was served to his guests. And he executed a favorite freedman for committing adultery with a knight's wife, although no complaint had been lodged by The husband. Husband was a cuckold. He was into that. The only specific charge of unnatural practices ever brought against him was that he had been King Nicomedes' bedfellow, always a dark stain on his reputation, and frequently quoted by his enemies. Licinius Calvus published the notorious verses: "The riches of Bithynia's king, who Caesar on his couch abused." Dolabella called him the queen's rival and inner partner of the royal bed, and Curio the elder, Nicomedes' Bithynian brothel. By the way, Bithynia was famous for its gay culture, and so Bithynian has often been used in great antiquity as synonymous with homosexual. And I think we should bring it back. It's not my idea. It was famous writing from 20 years ago. Bibulus, Caesar's colleague in the consulship, described him in an edict as the queen of Bithynia, who once wanted to sleep with a monarch but now wants to be one. And Marcus Brutus recorded that about the same time, one Octavius, a scatterbrained creature who would say the first thing that came into his head, walked into a packed assembly where he saluted Pompey as king and Caesar as queen. Ooh, ouch. Moreover, Gaius Memmius directly charges Caesar with having joined a group of Nicomedes' debauched young friends at a banquet, where he acted as the royal cupbearer, and adds that certain Roman merchants, whose names he supplies, were present as guests. Cicero, too, not only wrote in several letters, Caesar was led by Nicomedes' attendants to the royal bedchamber, where he lay on a golden couch, dressed in a purple shift. So this descendant of Venus lost his virginity in Bithynia. But also once interrupted Caesar while he was addressing the house in defense of Nicomedes' daughter Nysa, enlisting his obligations to Nicomedes himself. "Enough of that," Cicero shouted. "If you please, we all know that what he gave you, and what you gave him in return." Lastly, when Caesar's own soldiers followed his decorated chariot in the Gallic triumph, chanting ribald songs as they were privileged to do so, this was one of them: "Gaul was brought to shame by Caesar, by King Nicomedes he. Here comes Caesar wreathed in triumph for his Gallic victory. Nicomedes wears no laurels, though the greatest of the three." So I guess gay bashing Caesar was popular at the time, and he didn't necessarily put it off. Gosh, another message held for review. Oh, what is everyone saying? Chef and Awesome, we don't need you to defend your comments, although it's not showing them. So, Syphilis 2, yeah, YouTube does not like that expression. The comments are really tight. I mean, the moderation of comments is super tight right now. Okay, but what about Caesar's affairs with women? His affairs with women are commonly described as numerous and extravagant. Among those of noble birth whom he is said to have seduced were, oh boy, here we go, a lot of Latin. Okay, we're just gonna skip the Latin. Men, the women of noble birth: one guy's wife, another guy's wife, Marcus Crassus's wife, and even Pompey's wife. But this, how it may be, both Curio the elder and Curio the younger reproached Pompey for having married Caesar's daughter. Wait. Okay, yes. Okay, that's fair. I see what he was doing there. When it was because of Caesar, whom he had often despairingly called Aegisthus, that he divorced Mucia, mother of his 3 children. Both Marcus Brutus's mother, Servilia, was the woman whom Caesar loved best. And his first consulship, he brought her, said it right the first time, a pearl worth 60,000 gold pieces. He gave her many presents during the Civil War, as well as knocking down certain valuable estates to her at a public auction for a song. Knocking down. Is that the expression they mean? That's what it says. I might be misinterpreting that. When surprise was expressed at a low... Oh, knocking down the price. I see. Whoever translated this needs to get better, son. When surprise was expressed at how low the price, Cicero made a neat remark. It was even cheaper than you think, because a third had been discounted. Servilia, you see, was also suspected at the time of having prostituted her daughter, Tertia, to Caesar. A mod. That he had love affairs in the provinces too is suggested by another of the ribald verses sung during the Gallic triumph. Yes, we are on our second page of Caesar's sexual triumphs, not just his military ones. Home we bring our bald whoremonger, Romans, lock your wives away. All the bags of gold you lent him went his Gallic tarts to pay. That's the English translation. Among his mistresses were several queens, including Juno, wife of Bogades the Moor, who, according to Marcus Arcturus Naso, he loaded with presents. Bogades is said to have profited equally. The most famous of these queens was Cleopatra of Egypt. There it is. You're waiting for it. He often feasted with her until dawn, and they would have sailed together in her state barge nearly to Ethiopia had his soldiers consented to follow him. He eventually summoned Cleopatra to Rome and would not let her return to Alexandria without high titles and rich presents. He even allowed her to call the son whom she had borne him by his own name. Some Greek historians say that the boy closely resembled Caesar's in features as well as his gait. Mark Antony informed the Senate that Caesar had in fact acknowledged Caesarion's paternity, and other friends of Caesar's, including Gaius Macius and Gaius Oppius, were aware of this. Oppius, however, seems to have felt the need of clearing his friend's reputation, because he published a book to prove that the boy whom Cleopatra had fathered on Caesar was not his at all. Okay. We're going to close this account in another page after regarding Ptolemy XII of Egypt. I am losing my voice and my eyes are going cross, and no coffee in the world can cure me of these ills. If you are just tuning in, we are wrapping up reading Suetonius' The 12 Caesars, specifically the chapter on Julius Caesar. Okay. A tribune of the people named Helvius Cinna informed a number of people that, following instructions, he had drawn up a bill for the commons to pass during Caesar's absence from Rome, legitimizing his marriage with any woman or women he pleased, for the procreation of children, and to emphasize the bad name Caesar had won alike for unnatural or natural vice. I may have here record that the elder Curio referred to him in a speech as every woman's man and every man's woman, meaning Caesar got around with so many people of both genders, or all genders. Yet not even his enemies denied that he drank abstemiously. An epigram of Marcus Cato survives. Caesar was the only sober man who ever tried to wreck the Constitution, and Gaius Oppius relates that he cared so little for good food, and when he attended a dinner party where rancid oil had been served by mistake and all the other guests refused it, Caesar himself helped himself more liberally than usual, to show that he did not consider his host either careless or boorish. We are going to pour ourselves a little bit of coffee. No, I don't need kids. I'm good, thank you. But these are Caesar's children, which just goes to show we probably all, at least those of us, the very least, of any type of European or Mediterranean stock, descend from Julius Caesar. Who knows how many children he begat? Oh, where did we leave off? Yes. Now, Caesar was not particularly honest in money matters, either while a provincial governor or while holding office at Rome. Several memoirs record. As governor in Spain, he not only begged his allies for money to settle his debts, but wantonly sacked several Lusitanian towns, although they had accepted his terms and opened their gates to welcome him. It's like, oh, thanks for the surrender, but I'm broke. You're getting beat. In Gaul, he plundered large and small temples of their votive offerings, and more often gave towns over to pillage because their inhabitants were rich than because they offended him. As a result, he collected large quantities of gold that he could handle and began selling it for silver in Italy and the provinces at 3,000 sestertii to the pound, which was about 2/3 of their official exchange rate. He was giving away his money. He didn't have enough, then he had too much. In the course of his first consulship, he stole 3,000 pounds of gold from the capital and replaced it with the same weight of gilded bronze. He sold alliances and thrones for cash, making King Ptolemy XII of Egypt give him and Pompey nearly 1.5 million gold pieces, and later paid his civil war army and the expenses of his triumphs and entertainments by open extortion and sacrilege. Caesar equaled, if he did not surpass, the greatest orators and generals the world had ever known. His prosecution of Dolabella unquestionably placed him in the first rank of advocates, and Cicero, discussing the matter in his book Brutus, confessed that he knew no more eloquent speaker than Caesar, whose style is chaste, pellucid, and grand, not to say noble. We shall read more at another date, perhaps here in this chapter if you so wish, or another. But alas, I must retire for the night. Thank you for that comment, Chef and Austin. Yes, disgusting as it may be. Thank you for tuning in while I read to you Suetonius' 12 Caesars, specifically the chapter on Julius Caesar. I've enjoyed our company this evening, and I do hope that you subscribe if you aren't already, and follow again in the future. Stick around for our regularly scheduled scripted programs. I have been your professor. You're always welcome in my neck of the forum. Oh, it's stiff.